I want to tell you a story that still sits quietly inside my heart. A story that changed the way I look at family, love, and the quiet distance that grows between people without anyone noticing. It began on a morning that looked like any other. The sun had barely risen, and there was a soft grey light outside, the kind that makes the world feel half awake. I remember I was standing in my kitchen, warming water for tea. The kettle made a soft, clicking sound, the kind that usually comforts me. But that morning, something felt strange. There was a silence in the house that did not feel like peace. It felt like a pause, a waiting. I did not know then that my whole world was about to shift. I heard footsteps outside my door. Slow, hesitant, almost afraid. When I opened it, I saw my daughter-in-law standing there, alone, wrapped in a shawl, her eyes swollen as if she had cried the whole night. She looked at me as though she was carrying something heavy in her heart. "Are you all right?" I asked her softly. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. She just breathed shakily, like she had rehearsed something many times and still did not know how to say it. I stepped aside and told her to come in. She walked slowly, carefully, like she was afraid of breaking the silence in the house. I poured her some tea, but her hands trembled when she tried to hold the cup. The silence between us stretched, long and heavy. Then she looked up at me, and her voice cracked as she whispered the words that still echo inside me. "We married yesterday." For a moment, I did not understand. I just stared at her, waiting for the rest of the sentence. But that was it. Those were the words. Plain, simple, sharp. I felt a soft ache rise in my chest, not angry, not loud, just a quiet shock. Like someone had gently closed a door inside me that I thought would always remain open. I didn't shout. I didn't question her. I just sat there in silence, listening to the clock tick on the wall, each second feeling heavier than the last. Even now, when I think of that moment, it feels like the house itself held its breath, waiting for me to understand what had really happened and why. After that morning, the house felt different, even though nothing had changed. The walls, the furniture, the faint smell of tea and old wood, all the same, yet everything carried a new weight. I sat at the small kitchen table, staring at the steam rising from my cup, trying to steady my thoughts. How could this have happened without me knowing? How could my son, the boy I had raised from a baby, stand beside someone and make a promise without telling me? And yet, I wanted to understand before I reacted. I wanted to listen first. My family had always been close, at least in my mind. My son, Arman, had grown into a quiet, thoughtful young man. He was not loud or flashy, but steady and dependable, the kind of person who could always be counted on. As a mother, I had worried about him, of course. I had worried about everything, his choices, his friends, his future. But I had never imagined he would make a decision so quietly, so suddenly, that it would feel like the ground beneath me had shifted. And then there was his wife, Aisha. I had met her a few times before, during small gatherings, polite conversations, tea and laughter exchanged across the living room. She seemed kind, soft-spoken, cautious, someone who smiled gently, but rarely let herself be fully known. I liked her. I had always liked her. But there had always been a distance, a polite, careful distance, between us. Now, suddenly, that distance felt like a chasm I was unprepared to cross. I poured another cup of tea and tried to gather my thoughts. The kitchen window looked out over the garden, where the early morning light filtered through the leaves of the mango tree. It had rained the night before, and the earth smelled sweet and wet. The garden had always been my quiet refuge, the place where I could think, dream, and sometimes cry without anyone seeing. That morning, I walked outside and let the damp grass cool my feet. I needed to be alone with my thoughts, to breathe in the air, to remind myself that the world had not ended. Not yet. Arman had grown up in this house. Every corner, every creaking floorboard, every small detail of the kitchen and living room carried memories of his childhood. I remembered the mornings when he would come running in, half asleep, to ask for a glass of milk. I remembered the evenings when he would sit beside me, reading quietly, or telling me about school. Those memories felt both comforting and painful now. I realized how little control I had over the choices he would make as an adult. That was a hard truth, one I had always known in theory, but never felt in my bones until now. Aisha sat quietly in the living room while I went about my small morning chores. She did not speak unless spoken to, and even then, her voice was soft, careful, like she was trying not to make any sound too loud or too permanent. I noticed how she kept glancing at the door, as if expecting Arman to appear at any moment, as if afraid of being caught in a lie or half-truth. I wanted to ask her why, but I held back. The calmest way forward, I decided, was patience, listening, understanding. I remembered my own early days as a wife, long before I became a mother. I remembered the secrets I had kept, the unspoken fears, the times when I had made decisions quietly because I thought it was easier to protect someone else's feelings. Perhaps that was what Aisha was doing now. Perhaps she had felt she had no choice but to act quickly, to step forward without consulting anyone, because the world demanded it of her in ways I could not yet see. The thought softened my heart a little, but the ache remained. That quiet shock that had settled in my chest on the morning she told me these words. It lingered like a shadow I could not shake. I decided to speak softly, gently, to create a space for her to share. Aisha, I said, sitting down opposite her, I want to understand. Can you tell me what happened? She hesitated, looking down at her hands, fingers twisting nervously. It was fast, she said. We didn't plan for it to happen this way. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want to hurt anyone. Her words made sense, yet they left so many questions unanswered. I nodded slowly. I know you didn't want to hurt anyone, I said. But why so quietly? Why yesterday? Why not tell me beforehand? She glanced at the floor. I was afraid, she whispered. Afraid that he would, I don't know, that you wouldn't understand. The truth was simple. I wanted to understand. But my heart felt fragile, stretched thin by this sudden revelation. I realized then that life often moves in ways we cannot predict. And sometimes love, even family love, asks us to pause, to breathe, to wait before judgment. The morning stretched quietly, the sound of the kettle clicking, the faint rustle of leaves outside, the occasional chirp of a bird. All of it seemed louder than usual. It was as if the world had noticed that something delicate had shifted inside my home. And maybe it had. Later that day, I walked around the house, touching the familiar surfaces, remembering the small moments that had shaped our lives. The living room, with its faded carpet and worn couch, had seen birthdays, tears, laughter, arguments, apologies. The kitchen smelled of cardamom and tea, as it always had, but now it also smelled of uncertainty. The dining table, where we had celebrated small victories, family dinners, and late-night conversations, now felt like a threshold, a place where the past met the present in a quiet, uneasy confrontation. I sat down at that table, tracing the grain of the wood with my fingers, thinking of Arman and the boy he had been, and the man he had become. I thought of Aisha, sitting quietly in the living room, her eyes wide and wary, as if she were walking through a house full of memories that were not yet hers. And I realized the world had changed for all of us in ways that were subtle yet profound. The small shifts, the quiet decisions, the words left unspoken, all of it had led to this moment. A moment I could not ignore, no matter how much I wished I could. And so I waited. I waited for her to speak. I waited for him to arrive. I waited for the words that would explain what I could not yet understand. And in that waiting, I felt a strange mixture of fear, curiosity, and hope. The kind of hope that comes when a heart is broken, but still willing to listen. The day moved slowly, almost as if the house itself was holding its breath. The sunlight spilled through the curtains in gentle, quiet streaks. And yet, every corner of the living room seemed heavier than usual. I kept glancing at Aisha, noticing the way she sat on the edge of the sofa, her shoulders slightly hunched, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Each time I tried to speak to her, she looked away, eyes searching the floor, then back at me, hesitant, unsure. It was as if every word we said could break something delicate we both wanted to protect. I tried to make conversation, starting with small things, the way I always did. "Did you sleep well?" I asked, my voice soft. She nodded slightly, but her eyes betrayed her restless thoughts. "Tea?" I offered again. She shook her head. She was polite, careful. Like someone walking through a house that wasn't truly hers yet, trying not to disturb anything. And in that politeness, I sensed fear, not of me, but of the unknown. The day had begun, but nothing felt ordinary anymore. I remembered my son, Arman. He had always been cautious, but decisive when needed. I wondered what had prompted this secret wedding. Had it been a sudden decision, a fleeting thought turned action? Or had they planned it quietly, hoping I would never find out? The questions spiraled in my mind, unanswerable. And yet I knew I had to wait for the story to unfold, to hear it in their words rather than in my assumptions. Aisha finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "It wasn't supposed to happen this way," she said. "I didn't want to keep it from you, but I didn't know how to tell you. He he wanted it to be private. I think he was afraid of disappointing you." Her words were careful, fragmented. I nodded slowly, letting the silence stretch between us. I could feel her anxiety, her need to justify, to explain. And I knew that the truth was far more complicated than a simple apology. Later that afternoon, I decided to call Arman. I wanted answers directly from him. My hands trembled slightly as I held the phone, and my heart raced when he finally picked up. "Hello, Ma," he said, his voice calm, but with an edge I hadn't heard before. I suppose you've spoken with Aisha already?" My silence was my question. We got married yesterday. I'm sorry I didn't tell you. It was quick, unplanned, but we thought it was best this way." His words were careful, like someone walking on fragile ground. I could hear the tension behind them, the mixture of guilt and justification. Why not tell me?" I asked softly. "I wanted to tell you, Ma," he said, "but I didn't know how. We were both scared." That phone call left me with more questions than answers. I felt a strange ache, a mixture of sadness and worry, a longing to understand why my son felt the need to hide this. I sat back in my chair, staring at the ceiling, thinking of the boy I had raised, the man he had become, and the woman he had chosen. How had everything shifted so quietly, so suddenly, without the rituals, the laughter, or even a single word of preparation to share this moment with family? My heart ached quietly, like a slow drumbeat that refused to stop. Later, I tried to talk with Aisha again, hoping that perhaps, in calmer conversation, I could piece together the story. Was it, was it a happy moment? I asked gently, trying not to sound accusing. She looked up at me, tears brimming but not falling. Yes, and no, she said. It was just us. No one else, no family. We didn't have anyone there. It felt lonely, in a way, but it was right for us at that moment. Her honesty was painful, a quiet ache I could feel in my chest. I wanted to comfort her, to tell her it was okay, but I also realized that comfort could not erase the loneliness they must have felt. That evening, the tension in the house thickened. I had cooked dinner, hoping to restore some sense of normalcy, but neither of them seemed hungry. The food sat untouched on the table, the familiar smells filling the room, but the silence was heavier than any scent. I tried again to speak gently. We can talk about anything you want, any time. You don't need to feel afraid. Aisha nodded, barely, and I sensed that her fear was not of me, but of the unknown reactions of my son, of the world, of the consequences of a decision made in haste. I thought back to my own life, to the moments when I had made decisions quietly, hoping to protect someone else's feelings, hoping to shield them from disappointment. Maybe that's what they had done. Maybe this secrecy was a misguided attempt at love. And yet, it didn't make the ache in my chest any lighter. It didn't remove the sting of exclusion. I was left with a quiet uncertainty, a gentle grief for the loss of transparency, for the sudden absence of inclusion in something so important. As the day progressed, small tensions started to surface. Aisha was hesitant, moving carefully around the house as if afraid to leave marks. Her eyes often darted toward the door, expecting someone, perhaps my son, perhaps a family friend. And I felt the weight of unspoken words hanging in the air. I wanted to ask about everything: the ceremony, the witnesses, the absence of family, the rush, the secrecy. But every time I opened my mouth, the words stuck, hesitant, uncertain. It was not anger that kept me silent, but a quiet desire to understand first, to feel the full picture before reacting. Then, a misunderstanding arose. I noticed a small detail, a photograph she had brought with her from that morning, showing her and Arman smiling together in a small room. I assumed it was meant as a gift, a way to include me in a tiny piece of their day. But Aisha quickly withdrew it when she noticed my gaze. I thought you might not want to see it yet, she said. Her hesitation was understandable, but it hurt, a subtle sting of exclusion that I could not ignore. I realized then that this was not only about the secret wedding, but also about the fear of judgment, about the fear of disappointing me. The quiet escalated. Small gestures, like setting the cups down too softly, avoiding eye contact, walking carefully through the hall. All of them became reminders of the fragility of this new reality. I wanted to reach out, to bridge the gap, to create warmth in a day that seemed increasingly cold. But I also felt the weight of the decisions made without my knowledge. Each act of caution, each careful movement, reminded me that the world had shifted in subtle, quiet ways, ways I had not anticipated. At one point, I went to the window and looked outside, noticing the light beginning to fade, the shadows stretching longer across the garden. It felt symbolic of the growing tension inside the house, shadows creeping where there had been light, questions unspoken, hearts hesitant. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that patience was needed, that understanding would come in time, and that I must let the story unfold naturally, even if it hurt in the meantime. By nightfall, the rising conflict had established itself not with arguments or loud voices, but with a quiet, simmering tension. Aisha retreated to a corner of the sofa, and I stayed at the table, tracing the grain of the wood with my fingers, reflecting on the unexpected turns that life can take. I realized that families are built not only on celebrations and happiness, but also on patience, forgiveness, and the willingness to listen when things are not as simple as they seem. The day ended with an uneasy quiet. The air was still, the faint scent of jasmine from the garden outside drifting in through the open window. The house felt heavier than it had in the morning, but there was also a strange sense of anticipation, the feeling that the truth, though complicated, would reveal itself in time. And I understood, more clearly than ever, that love and family are not about control, but about trust, understanding, and the courage to face unexpected changes together. As I turned off the lights and prepared to rest, I thought about the days ahead. There would be more questions, more conversations, and perhaps more tension. But there would also be moments of quiet revelation, of gentle understanding, of shared humanity. And I knew that the path forward would not be easy, but it would be ours to navigate, carefully, patiently, and with hearts open enough to listen, even when the words are difficult, even when the decisions are hard to comprehend. The next morning, the house felt even quieter than the day before. The sunlight seeped gently through the curtains, painting the walls in a soft gold that usually brought comfort, but now it only highlighted the silence that hung between us. Aisha was sitting on the sofa, hands folded, staring out the window at the garden. Her posture was stiff, careful, as if she were bracing herself for something. I poured 2 cups of tea and carried them to the living room. The faint aroma of cardamom filled the air. I placed a cup in front of her without speaking and sat down beside her, waiting. Her eyes met mine briefly, then flickered away again. "Ma," she whispered, almost pleading, I think he's hiding something else." The words made my heart pause. Hiding something? My mind raced instantly. What could it be? Could there be more to this secret wedding than I had realized? A part of me wanted to shout, demand answers, demand my son step into this room and explain everything. But another part of me, the part that had always learned to breathe first, to think quietly before acting, told me to stay calm, to listen. I nodded gently. "Tell me," I said softly. "I want to understand. What is it that he's hiding?" Aisha hesitated, looking down at her hands. It's about his past. Something he never told anyone. Something he thought would hurt you. Me. Everyone. I only found out yesterday, after everything." Her voice trembled slightly, the words halting. I felt a pang of fear in my chest. A fear not for myself, but for the boy I had raised, the man he had become, and the woman who now carried his life with her. Then the phone rang. I jumped slightly, startled by the sudden noise. Aisha glanced at me with wide eyes. I picked up. It was Arman. "Ma," he said quickly, breathless. I need to come over. Can I?" His voice carried urgency, but also hesitation, a subtle tremor that made me realize he was scared of something, too. I nodded, trying to steady my own voice. "Of course," I said softly. "Come when you can." When he arrived, the tension in the room became almost tangible. He stepped inside, his shoes quietly pressing against the worn carpet, his eyes shifting from me to Aisha, then back to me. There was a silence as we all looked at each other, each of us unsure of where to start. The air was heavy, yet it held a strange kind of anticipation, the kind that precedes a revelation. I suppose you know about the wedding," he began, his voice steady but strained. I I didn't mean to keep it from you, Ma. I just—" He paused, swallowing hard. I was afraid. "Afraid of what?" I asked softly, keeping my tone calm, careful. My heart was racing, but I didn't want fear to dictate my words. "Afraid you'd be disappointed," he admitted. "Afraid you'd think less of me, of her, of the choices we made." I nodded slowly, sensing the honesty in his words. But my attention turned to Aisha, who shifted nervously beside me. She took a deep breath and whispered, "Ma, he didn't tell you, but there's something else. Something he's been carrying alone for years." My heart tightened. "What is it?" I asked gently, leaning forward slightly. Arman looked down at his hands, then back at me. "Ma, before I met Aisha, I made a mistake. A mistake I've kept secret from everyone. I thought I could fix it on my own, and I thought it didn't matter anymore. But now, I realize it does, and I want to tell you before it's too late." The words hit me like a cold draft. My mind raced through possibilities. A mistake? What kind of mistake? Something that could affect our family? Something that would change everything? I felt the familiar ache of worry, the fear that someone I loved had carried a secret that could hurt us all. He paused, swallowing hard. "When I was younger, I got involved in something I regret, something that it caused harm, even though I didn't mean it. And I never told anyone because I was ashamed. I thought I could move on, but I see now I can't. Not without telling you, Ma." I reached out and gently touched his hand. "Arman, you are not your mistakes. You are the choices you make now, and you are here, telling the truth. That's what matters." He looked at me with eyes filled with both relief and fear. "I married Aisha yesterday, in part because I wanted to start fresh. I wanted to show her, and myself, that I could do right by someone, that I could move forward. But I didn't want to hide anything from you. I didn't know how to begin." Isha squeezed my hand softly. "Ma, he's scared too. We both are. But we want to be honest now. With you, with ourselves." The moment stretched, the weight of unspoken truths, of hidden fears, of hurried decisions hung in the air. And then, slowly, Arman began to explain everything, the secret he had carried, the decisions that led him to this rushed wedding, the fear that had kept him silent for so long. Every word was careful, deliberate, full of remorse and hope. I listened quietly, letting it all sink in. There were moments when my chest ached with the realization of what he had endured alone. Moments when I wanted to cry, to hold him, to tell him that everything would be okay. And moments when I felt my heart open just a little wider, understanding the depth of love and fear that had guided his actions. As the story unfolded, I noticed the small gestures between them. The way Aisha reached for his hand, the way Arman looked at her. quietly grateful for her presence. There was love there, fragile but real, and there was trust slowly building, the kind that comes from honesty and the courage to face difficult truths together. Finally, Armand looked at me, his voice trembling slightly. Ma, I know I should have told you sooner. I know I hurt you by not being open. But I want to make this right. Please? I need you to understand that everything I did, with the hope of protecting those I love. I took a deep breath. The fear, the tension, the quiet ache, it all lingered, but it began to soften. I realized then that turning points are never dramatic explosions. They are quiet, intimate revelations that shift hearts slowly, gently, and irrevocably. And in that room, with the sun slanting through the curtains, with the faint smell of tea and wet earth, the truth had finally emerged. We sat in silence for a long moment. The heaviness in the room began to lift, just a little. I could see the relief in Aisha's eyes, the quiet humility in Armand's posture, and the beginnings of understanding in my own heart. The turning point was not the revelation itself, but the willingness to face it together, as a family, as human beings, with flaws, fears, and love intertwined. For the first time since that morning, I felt a subtle shift. The house no longer felt frozen in anticipation. The air felt lighter. The garden outside seemed brighter, the light warmer, as if the world outside had noticed the change inside. And I realized, honesty, even when delayed, carries a kind of healing power. That evening we spoke for hours, not in loud voices, not in arguments, but in quiet honesty. I asked questions. They answered with care. I shared my fears, and they listened. Each small word, each gentle explanation, built a bridge over the chasm that had grown silently between us. And in that bridge, I began to see the path forward. Not perfect, not without challenges, but real, grounded, and full of possibility. By the time night fell, I felt the tension begin to ease. The turning point had passed, not with shouting, not with anger, but with words, hearts, and understanding. And I realized something important. Sometimes, the moments that feel like betrayal or exclusion are only the beginning of deeper truths. The courage to speak, the courage to listen, and the courage to forgive. These are the moments that truly define family. As I turned off the lights that night, the house quiet and calm, I felt a small, steady warmth in my chest. The truth had been spoken, the silence had been broken, and we were no longer strangers in our own home. We were family again, fragile, human, and ready to face the days ahead together. The morning after the turning point felt different. The sunlight entered the house gently, as if it had waited to be sure the air inside was ready to receive it. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, and for the first time in 2 days, the silence felt calm, not heavy. Aisha came in quietly, placing a small plate of biscuits in front of me. She smiled softly, not the tense, careful smile of before, but a small, genuine one. I returned it with my own, and we sat together, side by side, sipping tea and breathing in the quiet warmth of our shared space. Armand joined us shortly, moving slowly and cautiously at first, as if testing the air. When he sat down, there was no need for words at first. The simple act of presence, of sitting together without the tension of secrets, felt like a quiet kind of reconciliation. We didn't need grand gestures or apologies repeated endlessly. Sometimes I realized healing comes from the smallest things: a shared cup of tea, a quiet nod, a glance that says, "I see you, and I understand." We began to talk softly about the wedding, not to relive it, not to accuse, but to understand. I asked about the small details, how it had been, who had been there, what they felt. Aisha described the day carefully, her voice calm, her eyes steady now. She spoke of nervous laughter, of whispered promises, of the strange mixture of joy and loneliness that had defined their secret ceremony. I listened quietly, letting the words settle around me, and I realized slowly that their choice had not been meant to hurt me, even if it had caused temporary pain. Armand spoke next, this time with more ease. He told me the truth about the fears he had carried, the shame he had felt about past mistakes, and the desperate need he had felt to protect both Aisha and me from disappointment. He did not ask for forgiveness outright, but his honesty carried it anyway. And as I listened, I understood the weight he had borne silently, the courage it took to finally speak, and the love that had guided him in his imperfect way. The hours passed quietly. We shared small stories, laughter emerging slowly, carefully, like sunlight pushing through clouds. The tension that had hung so heavily in the house began to dissipate, replaced by a sense of fragile trust. It was not perfect, and I knew it would take time to rebuild fully. But it was real, and that was enough for the moment. I looked at them both and realized something profound. Family is not about always knowing, always being included, or always being in control. Family is about patience, about listening, about letting each person carry their truths and share them in their own time. It is about understanding that mistakes, secrecy, and fear do not erase love, and that honesty, when finally spoken, can heal even the deepest rifts. That evening, we decided to take a small walk in the garden. The air was cool and fragrant from the rain that had fallen the night before. The flowers glistened with droplets, the leaves shone, and the world outside seemed to celebrate the quiet reconciliation happening inside. We walked slowly, talking in whispers, pointing out small things: a butterfly, the gentle rustle of the wind, the soft call of a bird. Each moment felt precious, a reminder that life moves forward even after difficult revelations. Aisha reached for Armand's hand, and he smiled down at her, squeezing it gently. I felt a lump in my throat, not of sadness, but of gratitude. Gratitude that they were learning to navigate life together, that they were willing to be honest, and that I could be part of their journey, even after being left out of the wedding itself. The day had begun with silence, tension, and uncertainty, but it was ending with understanding, warmth, and the quiet promise of trust. We returned inside, and I watched them as they spoke quietly about future plans. I saw hope in their eyes, a willingness to start fresh, to move forward without hiding. I felt the same hope for myself, the understanding that love and family are not static, but ever-changing, shaped by patience, courage, and forgiveness. I realized that the moments that feel like betrayal or exclusion are often the ones that teach us the most about empathy, compassion, and the depth of our own hearts. Later that night, I sat alone in the living room for a few minutes, reflecting. The house was calm, the soft hum of the night surrounding me. I thought of the morning when Aisha had whispered those words. We married yesterday. The shock, the ache, the uncertainty, all of it had been real. But now, having seen the courage it took to speak the truth, having listened to their hearts, I understood that love is resilient. It can carry us through fear, through mistakes, through secrecy, if we are willing to listen and forgive. I also realized that my son and daughter-in-law are not perfect. None of us are. And that is the beauty of family. It is built not on perfection, but on effort, on honesty, on the willingness to walk together even when the path is uneven. I felt a quiet pride in them, in their love, in their courage to face difficult truths. And I felt a quiet pride in myself, for holding space for understanding, for choosing patience over anger, and for allowing my heart to remain open. The night grew deeper, the house silent, but filled with a sense of gentle closure. I stood by the window and looked out at the garden, now bathed in moonlight. The flowers shimmered silver, the leaves whispered softly, and the world outside seemed to mirror the peace I felt inside. I knew the days ahead would not always be easy, that there would be moments of doubt, tension, or miscommunication. But I also knew that the foundation of honesty, understanding, and patience had been laid, and that was stronger than any secret, any fear, or any mistake. As I turned off the lights and prepared for sleep, I whispered a quiet prayer, not for perfection, not for control, but for love, patience, and the courage to face life's unexpected moments with an open heart. I thought of Arman, of Aisha, of the life they were beginning together, and of my place in that story. And I felt a quiet warmth, a sense of calm, and a gentle hope that whatever comes next, we would face it together. As a family, imperfect, human, but bound by love. And in that quiet night, I understood something important. Life is fragile. Love is resilient. And the moments that challenge us the most often teach us the most about forgiveness, trust, and the depth of human connection. We may not always understand each other perfectly. We may not always be included in every decision. But if we are willing to listen, to speak honestly, and to open our hearts, there is nothing that cannot be mended. I drifted to sleep that night with a soft smile on my face, knowing that the day that had begun with whispers of secrecy and fear had ended with quiet understanding, gentle reconciliation, and the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter that, though imperfect, was full of hope, warmth, and love.
Thank you for watching. Your time and support truly mean a lot. If you enjoyed this content, please like, share, and subscribe. It helps the channel grow and allows me to bring you even better videos. Stay inspired, stay focused, and I'll see you in the next video.